Hi guys, welcome to our kitchen here at Zest. We miss all of you. We've missed all of you these past several weeks. And as you can see though, we've been working on some virtual classes to offer you guys so that you can keep on cooking until you can be back in here at the school with us. So today I want to talk to you about fresh produce. Because we're living in a time right now where everything is all about the pantry dinners and the stuff that keeps a long time and the freezer dinners and all of that. But if you're like me and you've gone to the grocery store, you've probably had a hard time finding a lot of those staple ingredients. I've gone and, the entire freezer section is empty. And oftentimes so are many of the staple aisles with canned goods. But what I've mostly seen that produce departments are still pretty well stocked. So I wanted to talk to you today about using fresh produce and how you can still use fresh produce even though we're in this time of isolation, and you may only be going to the grocery store for, once a week or maybe even once every other week or every 10 days or however long you're trying to hold off between trips to the grocery store. I want to let you know that you can still be using fresh produce. So we're going to talk today about how to store your produce, how to make it last longer, and what to do with it if it starts to go bad. Or maybe even if it's not just starting to go bad, but you want to be able to buy in bulk and have that keep a long time. So there is a packet that we have for you that has all the lovely recipes and a lot more information, but I'm just going to kind of go over some basics with you about using your fresh produce. The first thing that I want to talk to you about today is how to store your produce. So there is in your packet, when you have it, a fun little diagram on the front page, just how to organize your fridge. Just some tips as far as safety, food safety goes, as far as how to organize your fridge. But the one thing I will recommend to you is if you're making, those less frequent trips to the store, you're most likely coming home with a lot of stuff, more than maybe you usually would. I usually go to the grocery store, 2, maybe even 3 times a week sometimes, depending. So now I've cut that down to between once a week and once every 10 days as how long I'm trying to stretch that out. So I'm coming home with a lot more groceries than I normally would. So one thing that you can do to make room for all of that is organize your fridge before you go grocery shopping. So try to clean out maybe what you don't need anymore, or try to condense some things. Maybe it's a good time to kind of wipe down your shelves and sanitize some things and make room for what all you're going to come home with. Once you get your fresh produce home, I know it's kind of a pain, but the best thing you can do is wash it right away and get it into whatever you're going to store it in, and then get it in the fridge. That's going to be one way that you can keep it lasting a lot longer. It's also going to save you time later on when you are going to cook with it, because it's already clean and ready to go. So most produce actually likes to be kept dry. I know when you go in the produce department at the grocery store, there are, these hoses that are basically dumping water on all of your produce, and it's pretty wet. That kind of is a good short-term way to keep produce fresh. That's kind of a little trick that the grocery stores use. But long-term, that's actually, especially with your things like lettuces and herbs, that's going to make them get soggy and go brown faster. So when you get those things home, the best thing you could do is wash them and dry them right away, and then get them to the fridge. Now, there are a few exceptions of things that actually like to be kept wet, and asparagus is one of them. So when I bring asparagus home, I like to wash it, which I did already here. And just a note, with your heartier vegetables, things that can often be pretty dirty, I like to use some vinegar spray. You can buy also, I see sometimes in the grocery stores, like a vegetable wash But straight up, just regular vinegar works really well to help clean your produce. So in addition to running them under water. So when I get my asparagus home, I'm going to wash it just like I did already here, and then cut the ends off, the very stem ends, because they've often maybe dried out. Think of it as like fresh cut flowers. They always tell you to get those little dry bits off. So now you have stems that are ready to soak up moisture. So I have some water here. I'm just going to set those in there. And these go into your fridge, and these will keep quite a while if you just keep changing out the water maybe every other day or so. Scallions also like to be kept in water, and those you can even keep on your countertop if you don't have room in your fridge. Sometimes the very tips will get a little dry after several days. So if you have room in your fridge, put them in your fridge. If not, they're fine on the countertop. Just again, make sure you're changing your water about every other day or so. Another exception is celery. So celery likes to be submerged in water. So when I get my celery home, I like to wash it really well and then break it down and then get it submerged completely in water. So you can put this into like a Tupperware container with a lid, or if you really need to save space, you can use a Ziploc bag. Just 2 notes about Ziploc bags. First of all, please reuse them. Let's be good to our environment. So we're not, using a lot of waste. So reuse them. That's perfectly fine. And also make sure that they're sealed really well if you're going to have it full of water. So I actually have this double bag here. So yes, washed, cut, and completely submerged in water is what celery likes. But as I said before, much of your produce actually likes to be dry, especially anything leafy like your lettuce and your herbs. So with lettuce, any kind of lettuce, I have some fresh kale here that I brought home from the grocery store. You're going to want to wash it right away. If I don't have any kale, I like to pull off the stems before I'm storing it, because that just saves a lot of space. So I pulled off the stems, I washed this, and then I spun it dry in my salad spinner here. And now that it's nice and dry, I'm going to put this, again, whatever storage system you like. If you want to use a container or a Ziploc bag is fine. I like to put a little dry paper towel in there too, because then that if there is any moisture that's left that I didn't get with the salad spinner, it's going to soak that up and help keep my lettuce really dry. Now, if you don't have a salad spinner, that's okay. Perfectly fine to use a towel. A kitchen towel, you can just lay your lettuce out on that and let it air dry, and then just maybe kind of pat it all around to get any excess water that might be on it off of that. So lettuce likes to be kept really, really dry. So do your herbs. So if you're going to use your herbs within, a couple of days, you can. It is okay to just submerge the ends into some water and put them in your fridge alongside your asparagus. But if you want your fresh herbs to last longer than that, you're going to want to swaddle them. So here I have some sage that I've had quite a while, and I have just wrapped the stems end in a dry paper towel, and I've wrapped all the way up to here. Now, if it starts to look a little wilty, you can dampen that very end of the paper towel where the roots are touching. Don't let the leaves actually get damp, because they will oxidize and brown very quickly. So swaddle your herbs and then keep them nice and tightly stored dry. So this is especially important too with things like parsley and cilantro. Don't be tempted to just leave them in the bag that they came in all wet and put them in your produce bin, because they'll get soggy really fast. So those are some things that definitely like to be kept dry.
most of you probably know this, but definitely there are some items that you want to keep out of your fridge, generally like your potatoes and your onions and your bananas and your apples. Those things are what we call gaseous vegetables. So they have a gas within them that promotes ripening, and it can promote ripening in other produce too. So not only is it good to keep them out of the fridge, it's also good and a good idea to keep them separate from one another. So don't put your potatoes and your onions in the same bowl, you know, or whatever you're keeping them in on your countertop. Keep them separate from one another and they will last longer. Now it is okay, you know, bananas, I know it's kind of a hard battle with them, especially right now. So, you know, I still say keep them out on your countertop, but as soon as they get ripe, if you put them in your fridge, you can maybe get 2 more days out of them before they get overripe. But hey, this is a good time to make banana bread and all things banana, like banana pancakes. So maybe we should have a banana class. Yeah, definitely keep those things out of the fridge. Kind of get to know your fridge too. Most refrigerators, the very top shelf, especially towards the back, can get really cold, and sometimes the temperature will fluctuate even to freezing sometimes. So try your hardest. I know your fridges are really full right now, but try your hardest not to keep your produce up there, especially things that are tender like your greens or your herbs. So try to keep them away from the coldest part of your fridge and give everything breathing room. So I kind of said this already, but make sure your fridge is organized. Organize it before you go shopping, and that way, you know, you have more room in there. I know it's really hard, but just do your best not to like cram that crisper drawer to the brim. Try to give everything some breathing room. So now, what to do, and we'll have some time for questions at the end, so hopefully we'll be able to do that. But what to do with your produce before it starts to go bad. Most people are probably going to want to go with the freezing option, right? So the freezer department in the grocery store is empty right now, but the produce department is full. So now's a good time to buy produce in bulk and get some freezing done. And then you have it, and it's going to be better for you because it's fresher than what you could have bought in the freezer department anyway. And it might even maybe save you a little bit of money depending. So we're going to talk about how to freeze. And I give you a kind of a breakdown in your recipe packet of just different things like to be frozen a little differently. So a lot of root vegetables, really your best option is to cook them completely, something like butternut squash or pumpkin, really any kind of squash. If you want to freeze that, you should cook it fully. So you can steam it and puree it, or you know, just steam it and chop it and freeze it that way. Fresh fruit likes to actually be frozen raw, so don't cook that at all. So if you want to freeze apples, you know, you're just going to chop them to whatever size you want to freeze them in, and then lay them out on a cookie sheet or a sheet pan or something. Put them in the freezer and let them freeze that way, and then once they're frozen, then you can condense them into your Ziploc freezer bags or however you want to condense them to make more room in your freezer. But blanching is actually what you're going to do for most vegetables if you want to freeze them. So I'm going to show you that right now. I have a couple different vegetables to blanch. So blanching is essentially just like a par cooking process. We are going to shock our vegetables twice. The first way we're going to do it is by dropping them in some boiling salted water. So I have some water here that's boiling away, and you're going to want to salt it like you do your pasta water. So you may have heard other chefs say salty like the sea. So, you know, a decent amount of salt. So I'm a big fan of kosher salt. That's what I have been using. So I've got this, you know, pretty well salted and boiling. And then I have a nice bowl of ice water here. So lots and lots of ice. And I actually like to salt that too. I know this, it seems like a lot of salt, but I promise you it's not all going to seep into your vegetables. But your vegetables do need some salt that's going to help preserve them in the freezer. So I'm going to add some salt to this as well. And just kind of stir that in there. And here I have some sugar snap peas. So let's say I bought too many of these and I want to freeze them. So I'm just going to drop these into the boiling water. And the rule with blanching is just no more than 30 seconds. So we're just essentially starting the cooking process here. I don't want them to be soft at all. I want them to stay nice and crispy, but they're going to turn a really beautiful green. Whatever you're blanching, you know, and, you know, obviously not everything is green. So if you're blanching cauliflower, it's not going to turn green, but your snap peas, your broccoli, your asparagus, I could blanch my asparagus right now. They're all going to turn just a really beautiful bright green. So about 30 seconds or so in that boiling water, and then straight into my ice bath. So we've shocked them in the hot water. Now we're going to shock them in the ice water, and the ice water is essentially going to just instantly stop that cooking process. So they are right at the texture that we want them to be. So if I were to just spread them out on the counter, that heat, that residual heat that's in them is going to carry over, cook them, and they're probably going to cook too far. So I'm shocking them in my ice water, and you don't want to leave them sit in here. You just want to leave them in long enough so that they are no longer warm. So as soon as they're cooled completely, and you know, you have to kind of fish through the ice a little bit, but that's all right. We're going to pull them out, and I have just a clean kitchen towel right here that I'm going to lay them out onto, because the last key element in blanching is to get everything really dry. So if there's a lot of moisture left in my vegetables and then I go freeze them, when I pull them out of the freezer and I thaw them, they're going to be soggy. So the best way to avoid that sogginess is to make sure that they're really dry before I go ahead and freeze them. This is, you know, a great thing to do with all your excess vegetables if you garden at home. If you garden this summer and you've got a lot of something like green beans, you can blanch those and put them in the freezer. So here are my snap peas, and I'm just going to let them dry completely, and then I can freeze them in my Ziploc freezer bags or however, whatever containers you like to freeze in. I also have some spinach. So you can freeze, you know, greens too. Definitely not lettuce, not cabbage, not sprouts. Those things you want to stay away from. They do not hold up well to the freezer. But something like kale or chard, Swiss chard, or collard greens, or even spinach, you can freeze. Now, generally, I usually recommend freezing mature spinach. This is baby spinach here. So, but I just want to show you that, you know, you can do those greens as well. I would say for something like spinach, you can even do less than 30 seconds. I mean, really, probably, I just need to kind of drop them in here, give them one little shake around, and then I'm going to pull them out. So usually I prefer to use my spinach fresh, but you know, it's kind of maybe a last resort. If I have too much and I'm afraid it's going to go bad, I can blanch it. So as you can see, I didn't leave it in there long at all. That's really, really enough for spinach. You know, maybe I might give kale a full 30 seconds, but with something like spinach, it does not need long at all. And then with spinach, a way to kind of get all that water out is to set it in a colander over a bowl. And you can even squeeze that excess water out like this and let it drain. Just like that. And once it's drained really well and I have that excess water out, then I can go ahead and freeze that too. So it's a great thing to do. Like I said, you know, your broccoli, your asparagus, your cauliflower, any kind of beans, like green beans or snap peas, is a great option if you want to buy in bulk and have extra. Brussels sprouts, so I know I said no cabbage, but Brussels sprouts are an exception. You can freeze those, blanch and freeze those as well. So that is blanching. Some other great options for kind of preserving your vegetables are fermenting and canning. That is a whole class in and of itself, so maybe we'll add that to the upcoming list, but I won't go into all of that now. There are also herbs, you can dry them as well. So I think we're going to do an herb class coming up. It's not on the schedule yet, but I'll be sure to let you all know when it is, so we can talk about drying herbs then. I do have a fun recipe in your packet for herb salt. So that's something you can do with herbs that maybe are getting to the point of where you need to use them now or they're going to go bad. So that's how to blanch and how to freeze your produce. One more tip, make sure you label it. And if you're going to be into containers or reusing your freezer bag, I recommend painter's tape because it just peels off really easily. And so then you're not having to, I don't know, to constantly scratch things out or fight with some other kind of tape or something, washing it, trying to rub it off. Yeah, so painter's tape works really well. Do label it, because I know, like, I'm very organized, and there's been times where I put something into the freezer and I don't label it, and I think, I will remember what that was. I don't, and you won't either. Label it. And that's kind of all what to do as far as freezing goes, but I wanted to take some time and do some recipes here with you guys. So, and save some time at the end if you have some questions. So some other fun ways to use up your produce and have it keep lasting a little bit longer. One thing I want to show you is pesto. I love, love, love pesto, and I use it for everything. You know, I put it on pasta, on a sandwich. I put it on, use it as a sauce in place of tomato sauce for my pizza. What else do I do with it? Sometimes I just eat it as a dip with some crudité, some vegetables, something like that. Pesto is just really delicious, and it's actually pretty easy to make. So true pesto is, if you're going to make it the real way, is made with a mortar and pestle, or there is kind of this funny kind of rocking horse kind of knife called a mezzaluna. It can be made that way. I'm going to show you how to make it in the food processor. So it's the cheater's way, but it's so much easier, and you can kind of make it in big batches. And you can make it with a lot of different things. So most people, pesto is being made with fresh basil, which is in season right now. So on your next trip to the grocery store, you can, you know, buy a bunch, but you can use whatever kind of greens that you have on hand. So this might be a good use for some of your greens that you think, oh, these are starting to turn and I don't know what to do with this. I love to make it with kale. I love to make it with spinach. I love to make it with arugula. I've even made it with things that aren't greens. So maybe like broccoli or peas. I love dough. That can be really good too. Watercress, you know, maybe even throw in some sprouts in there if you had some of those in your fridge. Lots of different things. And the ratio is really easy. So the one thing you need to remember is just 8-to-1. So that's going to be your ratio. So 8 parts greens to 1 part everything else. So if you do some math in your head, if you have 2 cups of greens, that means you're going to have a 1/4 cup of everything else. And the basic main ingredients besides greens are going to be usually some Parmesan cheese, but you can use, this is traditional, but you can use any kind of cheese. You can also use, if you don't eat cheese, maybe you're vegan or something. I like nutritional yeast, it's delicious, and that can be kind of a really fun option to give you some umami flavor. So you can use nutritional yeast. And then some nuts. So traditionally it's pine nuts, but you can use whatever nuts you have on hand or seeds. Today I'm actually going to be using some sunflower seeds. So that's what I have going on today. And then also some olive oil is going to kind of be our base to turn this into a little bit of a sauce. I mean, this is our moisture that we're going to add. I also often like to add maybe just like a little squeeze of lemon or maybe some lemon zest. I've given you lots of ideas in your recipe packet here. Garlic is kind of an essential for me. So I like to add lots of garlic to my pesto. But you can also add fun things like, you know, some truffle, if you've got something, you know, exotic hiding in your pantry, or some smoked sea salt or something fun like that you could do. And the olive oil too, you know, you could substitute other things like avocado oil or coconut oil. You can really mix and match with this. So I'm going to start with 8 parts greens, and I think I'm going to use, I'll use a little bit of my kale that I have washed here and maybe a little bit of my spinach. So we'll do half and half. All right. So I'm going to pack down, I guess I can turn off that blanching water, right? Pack down some kale. Now I'm going to add some spinach to that. So if you're going to use something like broccoli, that's actually a good use for some of your blanched broccoli that you have, or maybe some extra broccoli that you have in the freezer that's already been frozen. You can just thaw it and use it up that way. But better, something that's really, really hearty like that, you want it to be at least par cooked, or it's not going to blend very well in your food processor. So not completely raw. But these, of course, are raw because they're nice and soft. So, and if I had some fresh basil or you know, some other fresh herbs, maybe some parsley or cilantro, I could definitely throw that in here as well if I wanted to add some, you know, kind of a more intense flavor. All right, so I'm gonna pack my leaves down in there. I'm gonna add my Parmesan and my sunflower seeds and my garlic. I'm gonna break down my garlic just a little bit because sometimes I find that it kind of can roll around in the food processor. You don't have to chop it finely, but just break it down a little bit so that it can get in the blades. I'm going to add a little salt to this as well. And you can add some fresh cracked pepper if you want to. And we're going to pulse this, okay? So don't just turn on the food processor and let it go, or you'll wind up with kind of just a not a very pleasant paste. You want to have just a little bit of texture. So I'm just going to keep pulsing and slowly breaking this down. So notice I haven't added the olive oil yet. I've added everything but. And maybe just stop and scrape down once. Oh, it smells good. I wish you guys could smell this, but hopefully you can see here. I'm going to take it just a little bit more fine than this. A good indication is when you just maybe start seeing it sticking to the sides. that's where you want to stop because you don't want it to turn into a full-blown paste. So here I have my mixture. Now you can even just, if you want to leave it here, you can just stir in the olive oil, or you can, pulse it a few times, but don't blend it for too much longer. So I'm just going to add this. All right. And here we have our finished pesto. It's beautiful. And that spinach will leave it a nice bright green color. This will stay pretty green because this is kale and spinach, so you won't have too much oxidization. But if you're using straight herbs, like basil and other things, like parsley or cilantro, they're going to want to brown. This is going to want to brown. So the best way to keep it from browning, which of note, if it does brown, it doesn't mean it's gone bad. It just isn't as pretty to look at. You can still use it, but we eat with our eyes, so we want to try to keep it as green as possible. So whether you're storing this in the fridge or the freezer, I like to store it in containers. Maybe you've got some canning jars or whatever, Tupperware containers you have, something that can seal really well, or just this is a reused jelly jar. So just something that you can make sure you can seal it really tightly. And if I'm going to freeze it, I like to freeze it in portions that I know I'm going to use that whole amount. So if I make a big batch of this, I'm maybe not going to freeze it all in one big jar. I like to freeze it in some smaller little jars, and that way I can just pull out of the freezer what I need. But I'm going to go ahead and get this into here. And if I'm going to keep this in the fridge, what you're going to want to do is just pour a little more olive oil on very top. So once you get this all in here, you can add just a little bit more olive oil on the top. And kind of roll it around, make sure it kind of covers the surface just like that. All right, and get that lid on there really tight. And this can go into your fridge, and this will keep, as is, this will keep at least a week or so in your fridge. If you're not dipping into it. If you're dipping into it, and you're opening the lid and everything, you maybe might want to add a little bit more olive oil every time so that you try to keep that seal of air. But otherwise, you can get this to last a week in your fridge. And if you put this in the freezer, you can have this last a few months even. So I've kept pesto up to maybe 3 months or so in my freezer. This is a really great, handy little sauce for your pasta. If you just need a super quick weeknight dinner, boil some pasta, add this, some frozen shrimp, or a pan-seared chicken breast or something, and a salad, and you've got a really easy dinner. But this is delicious, and I love to kind of just snack on it, as I said, with some bread or crudité or something. So that is pesto. So I hope you've got some good ideas from that recipe. And the next thing that I want to show you is my very favorite salad of all time. So this is a salad, I generally call this my winter salad because it's very hearty, and it's ingredients that are really prevalent around Thanksgiving time. So this is a salad that it's kind of become my tradition to make it for Thanksgiving, because it's just that one vegetable. You can make this head and then it's done, and then it's not something else that's taking up room on your stovetop or your oven or whatever. But it's really delicious, and it's so delicious. I like to eat it any time of year. So I'm going to show it to you and talk about some variations that you can do with this. So this salad, so if you're someone who's not a kale eater, these recipes, the pesto and this salad, are very good recipes for someone who doesn't like kale. I know it's a very it can be a little bit woody and chewy when it's raw. So turning it into pesto or turning it into this salad, which I'm going to show you why, are just kind of ways that will soften it up to the palate, and adding lots of other great flavors so that you maybe don't get that kind of a little bit metallic aftertaste, because there's a lot of iron in there and it's really good for you. But some people might not like that flavor, or they'll feel like, you know, oh, I feel like I'm chewing on a vitamin C tablet, you know. So this is a really great option for that. So I have the rest of my kale here that's been washed. The one way that we're going to break this down and make it more palatable is by chiffonading it. So it's a chiffonade is a fancy term, a fancy French term that's often used, a technique that's used with basil. Basil is a really fragile fresh herb, and you know, if you've ever used fresh basil, you know, as soon as you kind of start to chop it up, it turns brown really quickly. So the chiffonade is a technique that's often used with basil to allow you to only have to go through it with your knife once, and it will therefore not get beat up as much as you would like chopping parsley. But it's really pretty, and I like doing it with my kale, even though kale is obviously very hardy and it's not going to turn brown no matter how much you beat it up. This is a really great way to just get it to a more bite-sized piece, I guess, in your mouth, so you don't notice the texture. So if you'll notice, I'm just kind of stacking leaves on top of one another. You know, maybe I'll put a nice big one on the bottom, and then kind of just whatever I have on top of that.
I don't feel any different.
But you're just going to make little stacks.
That doesn't mean I won't.
Little stacks with your leaves, like this.
A year and a half, literally, before home.
See if I can find another big one in here. I have a lot of small ones, but that's okay. You can stack small ones on one another. All right. I almost got all of this done. So stack up your leaves as best you can. It's all right if it's not, you know, perfect. If you've got little stragglers, you can kind of just shove them in there. And then you're going to take your stacks and you're going to roll them up. So I'll do this nice pretty one first. You're going to roll them up as tight as you can, like this. And then you're just going to take your knife. Watch your fingers, watch your thumb especially. Don't let your thumb creep out behind your front fingers. Keep that back there. Protect it. And I'm just going to slice down as thin as possible. This is called chiffonading. So if you can't remember the term chiffonade, remember confetti, because that's kind of what it looks like, I think. So now I have this really pretty confetti kale. I'm going to do that here with the rest of my rolls. And it's all right if it's not perfect or they're not all the same size. Just get it as thin as you can. And don't try to go fast if you've never done it before. Just take your time. Once you've done it a few times, it's like riding a bike, and then you can be fast. All right, one more stack. I miss having you guys here in person. This is kind of lonely. All right, I've got all my kale into a nice chiffonade, nice confetti. We're gonna let that hang out just a second. Now, your recipe also calls for some Brussels sprouts. I didn't have any Brussels sprouts, but I have some cabbage at home, some regular cabbage at home that I need to use up. So I'm going to add that into here. However, I forgot to bring it with me, so I'm going to add it when I get home. But you can kind of do the same thing with your Brussels sprouts, just slice them really thinly. Or if you've got some cabbage that you need to use up, that's a nice option to add into here. Or you can just use the kale. Like, you don't have to add any kind of cabbage at all or any other green. It can just be kale if you want to stick with that. And now we're going to make a really simple dressing. So here I have a little bit of chopped onion. This is some chopped red onion. Your recipe calls for shallots, so if you've got them, great. If you don't, that's okay. Red onion's fine. If you don't have red onion, that's okay. Regular onion is fine too. Yellow onion, sweet onion, whatever you have. This recipe is flexible. To that, I'm going to add a little bit of Dijon. So I have maybe like 2 or 3 tablespoons of the red onion, and I'm adding about a tablespoon of Dijon mustard to that. I am going to add some lemon. So you need about 3 tablespoons of lemon juice. This is a really big lemon. Most lemons, I think, usually have about 2 tablespoons of juice in them. This is a huge lemon, so I'll definitely get 3 tablespoons out of that. And if you don't have one of those fancy reamers, a fork is actually kind of my favorite tool to use. So wow, this lemon had a lot of pits in it, a lot of seeds. Sometimes I just try to get away without using a strainer, but I think I'm glad I pulled out the strainer here, because I would be picking out a lot of seeds out of my bowl. All right. So we've got that. We have our onion, our Dijon, our lemon juice. I'm going to add a garlic clove here, or 2. And I like to get that really fine, so I like my little microplane here tool. I mean, you can just chop it by hand. That's totally fine. But if you've got one of these, this is a good use for them. They don't have to be just for Parmesan cheese and lemon zest. And if you have a few bigger chunks left, just throw them in there. All right. We've got some garlic. And And I'm going to add just a little bit of salt. And I'm going to whisk in some olive oil. About a half a cup or so. Now, this amount of dressing is enough for a full head of kale and some Brussels sprouts. I gave you the ratios in your recipe. So I'm actually going to pour a little bit of dressing out of here. I want to toss my kale with it, but this is a little bit too much. So we're just going to pour some out and we'll save it for later. Yeah, so if you make the full dressing, make sure you use a whole head of kale and a little bit of something else too. And then we're just going to toss this together. And this is my favorite thing about this recipe. This salad is actually better the next day. And I've kept this salad as long as 4 or 5 days, and it's still really good. For the kale, just being as tough as it is, just holds up to dressing so well, and it kind of marinates and just gets really, really delicious and flavorful. And you forget that you're eating, kale. So this is a great way to have greens. You know, you could make a big batch of the salad, and then you've got a base for your lunch every single day. If you want to do that, if you're maybe you're still working, or maybe you're working from home, but you're really busy and you don't have a lot of time to take a break for lunch, make a big batch of this salad on Sunday, and then throughout the work week, you can just top it with, you know, a different protein or whatever fun things you want to add into it. Generally, in your recipe, I call for a little bit of Parmesan cheese. But again, as I said, you know, you can substitute any kind of cheese. You can leave out the cheese. You could add some nutritional yeast if you want some of that umami flavor, or maybe you've got some other ideas. You can let me know if you've got other ideas. And I'm going to add a little bit of sunflower seeds again, because that's what we had in our freezer. Your recipe calls for almonds. So I love it with almonds. I love to toast them a little bit to bring out some more flavor and do that. But I've used everything from walnuts and pecans or pumpkin seeds. I have a sister who's pretty sensitive to nuts. So if I am having Thanksgiving dinner with her, I will use like the sunflower seeds like I am today, or pumpkin seeds. Are a good option. I like to have something in there just because it's like a little crunchy, so it adds some interesting texture. But you certainly don't have to put anything in there. And at Thanksgiving time, I really love to add maybe some apples and cranberry. You could add, you know, some citrus to this. You could add strawberries to this. Whatever other vegetables you want to add to this. Is great, but this base right here, this will keep, you know, up to 5 days in your fridge dressed. So this is my favorite salad. Love it. So as you can see, it shouldn't be too wet, you know, just damp. So if you're not going to use a whole head of kale and some cabbage, or, you know, a head and a half of kale or something, you know, don't use all of the dressing. Keep some of that dressing, or make a half recipe of dressing or something. That smells good. It makes me want to eat it now. All right, so that's my favorite kale salad. And I just have a couple more things I want to show you. Let me clean off my cutting board here because I made a mess. These are my favorite little tools, by the way. These are called bowl scrapers. They're just a little plastic. If you've got like a restaurant supply store around you, you can find them there. Or we have them at our store, at the kitchen store, Zest. If you get to come visit us when we're back open. All right, so we've cleaned that up. There's just a couple more things that I want to show you. One of them is roasted garlic. This is a really, really fun one. So, you know, you can buy garlic in whole sleeve in the grocery store. So it comes with, you know, maybe like 5 heads or so. And maybe, you know, you bought a bunch, and after a while, garlic keeps a long time, but after a while it will start to sprout. No matter, you know, if you're keeping it in a garlic crock away from everything else, it's still going to eventually sprout. So this is what I like to do with it when garlic starts to sprout. Now, if your garlic starts to sprout, you can still use it for anything that you use garlic for. Some chefs find that the sprout on the inside will add a little bit of bitterness to the garlic. So if you're chopping it and you find that, you can just kind of take it out. If you cut the garlic clove in half, you can just take your finger and kind of peel it out. But I love roasted garlic, and so if I'm noticing that my heads of garlic are starting to sprout, this is what I like to do with them. So you're just going to take your head of garlic here and peel off that extra, you know, as much of that outer layer of skin that you can. We're not going to peel it completely, because you would have to individually take off all the cloves, and we want to leave this whole. So just as much as you can get off, like that. And if I'm going to bother turning on my oven, oops, we lost one. I prefer to use a couple of heads of garlic, not just one, but I mean, you can certainly do this with one. Or if you have a fancy tabletop toaster oven, maybe you can use that because it's smaller and it doesn't take time to heat up or use as much energy. So you can see this garlic, it's got a sprout coming off of it already. Just pull that off. So I have my heads here that I've peeled off that extra outer layer. So now I'm just going to take my knife, and the very top, so you want to leave the root end intact, but just the very top of that, I'm going to open up. So I'm going to just cut that off. Sometimes when you cut that off, these are really small heads, but if you've got a bigger head and you cut that off, sometimes you can get it to stay in one piece and you can add it back in, but here, these are so tiny, this just kind of like falling apart, so that's okay. We'll just get rid of those. So now I have my garlic heads with the tops open, so the garlic is exposed. I'm going to put them in some foil. And I am going to take a little bit of olive oil and just drizzle over the top here. Drizzle over the top here. Some salt. And if I have bigger heads, I usually like to wrap them individually, but these two are really tiny, so I'm just going to keep them together. You want to just close that up, and you don't have to wrap it tight. You know, you can just allow some air to get in there, but just gently wrap that up. And you're going to stick this right into the oven at 350 for at least an hour. If you've got, you know, bigger heads of garlic, they might even want to go for about an hour and a half. And your kitchen's going to smell wonderful, by the way. And I should have done one ahead for you. I did not. So I will post a picture on Facebook later. I'm going to put these in the oven now. And when they're done, I will make sure you see the final product. But they're just going to be nice and brown and caramelized. So you're just going to pull them out of the oven. You're going to let them cool completely. And then once they're cool, you'll be able to just take your hand like this and squeeze, and all of that goodness, that soft brown buttery garlic is going to kind of squeeze out of the leftover skin that you have. And you can then keep that in your fridge for up to, even, a week at least. Or you can put that in the freezer. You can either freeze it in little Ziploc bags or little Tupperware containers, whatever you have that you like to freeze in. And now you've got a basis for your next soup or stew. You've got a really delicious dip if you add just a little bit more olive oil and some salt and pepper. You're going to have a really delicious spread to make some garlic bread. So spread that on some toast or bread, and you've got a really yummy dip there. Or put it on the bottom of your pizza crust, and then some of that pesto or something like that. So there's lots of uses for roasted garlic. Put it on a tomato. It's really good on a tomato. Yeah, but most people like to use it as in soups or stews. So that's a really great way to use up garlic if you think it's starting to sprout really bad because you bought a lot and you haven't used it all. So I'm going to get these in the oven. All right. And the last thing I want to talk about just really quickly, and then we'll give you guys a chance to maybe ask some questions if you have time. So you do have a really fun recipe for herb salt. I think I mentioned that before. I won't go over that, but stock. Stock is the last thing, but not least for sure, that you can do with your produce before it starts to go bad. So if you've bought a lot of stock, I want to show you this. So I like to keep bags in my freezer, and every time I chop an onion, those little stem ends, like here, this onion is starting to sprout. So, but maybe I'm going to use this onion for something, but I'm going to pull out that part that's sprouting. Obviously, you always, are going to peel your onion. I don't really like to use the skins much. A little skin is okay. A lot of onion skin, I feel like, kind of makes my stock a little metallic tasting. So generally, I throw that away. But if there's like a little bit left on my stem, that's fine. But say I'm going to use this onion. Say I'm going to slice this onion. So I'm going to cut that end off, and I'm going to slice this onion up for something. These are my leftovers, right? So I've got that top that I cut off. I pulled out the part that's starting to sprout. I've got my little root end here. I'm going to throw those into my bag in the freezer. And I do the same thing with my carrot ends or peels. I do the same thing with my the ends of the stalks of celery, or maybe if I didn't have a use for the heart of the celery leaves. I keep everything in bags in the freezer separate. So I've got a separate bag for my onions, a separate bag for my carrots, a separate bag for my celery. I save my parsley stems. I save my mushroom stems. So if maybe I bought some shiitake mushrooms and I pull off the stems, I save those. I even save my Parmesan rind. So if you bought a block of Parmesan and you get down to the end, throw that rind in the freezer. That's a really great umami flavor to add to your stock. What else do I save? Those are kind of the main vegetables. You can use a lot of things, but stay away from something that's going to break down and make the stock really cloudy. So stay away from onions, potatoes, bell peppers, things like that. But maybe, leeks, that's a great option. That's kind of anything in the onion family. So leeks, shallots, red onion, whatever you've got. I've got some red onion in here. You can also, well, I said save your parsley stems. Maybe you have some other herbs on hand that are starting to go. You could throw those into the freezer. When I've got full bags, I just dump everything into a big stock pot and cover it with water by at least an inch, maybe 2 inches. Generally, and this is the reason why I keep my stuff separate, is generally you want to have about twice as much onion as you do everything else. Because some things like, carrots you know, if you have too many carrots, it's going to taste like carrot stock, which carrots are great, but maybe whatever you're making, you don't want it to taste just like carrots. So any onions are generally what you want to have the most of. So I keep everything separate. And when I maybe have like, you know, 2 full bags of onions and 1 full bag of my other stuff and like, you know, a handful of parsley stems and a handful of my mushroom stems, I just throw them all in a stock pot, cover it by at least 1 inch or 2 of water. Maybe I might add a bay leaf if I've got that in my pantry. You can add garlic. So a lot of chefs will say, don't add garlic to your stock. I don't add it if I'm making chicken stock because that has to cook for a much longer time. And garlic can end up become bitter. It can become bitter. But in vegetable stock, you really only need to cook this for an hour tops. So I bring it to a boil, I turn it back down to a simmer, and I let it simmer for at least a half an hour, but up to an hour. And then I pull it off the heat and I strain out all those vegetable scraps. They've now gotten their full use. You haven't wasted anything, so they can go in the trash. Or unless you've got, you know, I don't know if once they're cooked, if chickens would eat them or something, if you've got chickens, but yeah, so then you have your really delicious flavorful stock that you can then put into the freezer or keep in your fridge for a week to use up. So that's another really great thing that you can do with produce before it starts to go bad. So I've talked a lot for like an hour, so I think that's probably all I have for you today. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope some of you will be able to join us for the future classes that we're doing. And I don't know if we're able to, but if you guys have any questions, you are welcome to ask. Does anybody have any questions? No.
Anna,
Okay.
I do.
I think we might be having a little technical difficulties with that aspect. So we'll try to work on that for the next class. But thank you all so much for joining us. You might be able to comment below. I don't know if we have that capability set up today. If not, we'll make sure we have it in the future. So if you want to comment with questions. But this video will also be available later on YouTube. So you'll be able to watch it there. And you, as always, you know, you can email us at hello@zestchef.com. And I'm usually the one that's personally answering those emails. So you can feel free to ask a question there or post a message to our Facebook page. And we'll be able to get back to you that way. All right, thanks guys so much for taking time out of your day to join us. Please stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back again soon. All right, thanks guys.